Santa's Lonely Helper. Written and performed by Big Mike Sangiamo. And now, join us by the Christmas tree. I should prepare you by saying this story starts off quite sad. But by the end, you'll go from quite sad to quite glad. I'll start with the end so you'll know I'm sincere. By the end, all the sadness will be replaced by good cheer. This Christmas Eve tale is not known by most. It's the story of a man who lived on the East Coast. His name's not important, but let's call him Jim. It'll just make it easier when referring to him. Him, that is, Jim, was never too slim, so much so that his classmates often poked fun at him. His close friends were few, but that's usually true, even for others, and even for you. The best part about best friends is that they are precious and few, no matter how many, as long as your best friends are true. So, this is how Jim got through most of his days, with good friends who laughed good at his hilarious ways. Jim had great fun, and his friends had the same, and this wonderful fun would counter Jim's pain. It's important to note that Jim smiled a lot, and no one was to blame when apparently happy Jim was not. His fun-filled friendly days were important to him, but 'twas at night, when he was alone, that his spirits got dim. He did his best to fight this and keep his pain under wraps, but as Jim grew older, his pain outgrew his grasp. His friends were still there, but at night they were missing. They'd go home to their families, a special life blessing. Jim did his best to catch up to his peers, but finding significance in others stresses all of us to tears. He did find excitement and adventures with some, and some led to love, although he never found the one. Now, that's nobody's fault. In fact, that's often the case. Only the luckiest ones find love and their place. The rest of the world searches for a match to their soul. Sometimes they find nothing, and sometimes love makes them whole. To pass the time while they wait for a path to converge, some find joy in their passions. Most can't resist the urge. For the him, that is, Jim, who's the main focus here, his passion was cheer, most simple, most clear. And of course it makes sense that the season of cheer, the season of Christmas, was his favorite time of the year. 335 days he would wait, and once the last turkey gobbled, Jim would celebrate. Jim sincerely loved Christmas, the whole Christmas season. It filled his heart with so much joy. He was happy beyond reason. It dated all the way back to when Jim was a boy. His family filled Christmas with magic and joy. In fact, the first chance Jim got, he joined Santa's team. The first time he helped Santa, he was barely 13. Santa always needs help to prepare every year, at the malls or online, to help spread Christmas cheer. In fact, if you've sat on Santa's lap and told your wishes to him, sometimes it was Santa, but it also might have been Jim. That's how it works because things get so busy. Santa has so much work that he works the elves till they're dizzy. So Santa relies on his helpers and elves, and some even love Christmas more than themselves. And that brings us back to Santa's helper, Jim. Spreading joy with all others filled the joy within him. And so in the 35th year of his life, as that 23rd day became a cold December night, Jim made his plans as he did every year, for tomorrow was Christmas Eve. The great day was finally here. Jim woke with excitement at the first sign of light, because you remember what happens to Jim's spirits each night. But today was the day that Jim lived for the most. Today was pure magic. Today, Jim was the host. So Jim packed up his suit and his sack filled with toys. He set off to visit his friends and their small girls and boys. He was to give them a taste of what the next night would bring. And everyone loved it, and the children would sing. And while the parents all laughed at Jim's Santa routine, the children believed in Jim as the actual thing. And those moments hold magic. Belief is the key, for it was in their little hearts, not what their eyes see. So Jim made his way from each friend to each friend. He loved to do it so much, he wished it would never end. But, alas, as the sun set on that cold winter day, and once the last Christmas present had been given away, Jim had to head back to his empty home to take off his suit and sit all alone. He would sit in his room and stare at his tree and reflect on his friends and their holiday glee. He tried to hold on to the happiness that he shared on that day, but as he looked at his tree, he felt it slipping away. He managed it 364 days of the year, but this was the worst part. This part, right here. The lights on his tree blinked in succession, and Jim's desolate house fed his depression. Each night brought pain, but this night brought more, because tomorrow was Christmas morning, and being alone is tough to endure. But Jim sipped on his cocoa, and Jim did his best to focus on the good things and forget all the rest. Once his cocoa was done, Jim headed to bed, while tunes of Christmas carols played in his head. Jim closed his eyes and turned out the light, and a tear hit Jim's pillow on that Christmas Eve night. But then something happened, and Jim opened his eyes. He heard some fairly loud sleigh bells. What a pleasant surprise! At first Jim thought that it could be a dream. After all, Santa does his work unheard and unseen. But when Jim looked out his window, he couldn't believe what he saw. There he was. It was Santa, delivering presents next door. It's a very rare thing to see Santa at work. Then an elf spotted Jim and just gave him a smirk. Sure, the helpers do meet Santa at the annual meeting, but just to say hi and a short meet-and-greeting. Aside from all that, the helpers report back to the elves. And when they work, for the most part, they work for themselves. That's part of the system, and the system works well. It's designed so the children can never quite tell. But aside from all that, this was all so exciting to watch the gifts being placed by the soft Christmas tree lighting. When Santa was done, he placed his finger on his nose, and just like the story, up the chimney he rose. He walked to his sleigh to continue his work, but then Santa turned with a quite awkward jerk. He lost his footing and slipped, and he slid down the roof, and before he fell off, he grabbed Prancer's hoof. But despite holding on with all of his might, Santa let go and went for a short flight. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I've heard this before. But trust me, you haven't, okay? So Jim rushed next door. He arrived to find Santa grabbing his knee, And Santa said, "Jim?" And Jim said, "It's me." "What in the world are you doing here? Did you just hear me fall, or was it the reindeer?" "No, Santa," Jim said as he tried to make sense. "I first heard your sleigh bells," which made common sense. An elf had come down to help Santa get up, but Santa was hurt, and the pain would not let up. Santa spoke to the elf for a moment or two, then Santa turned to Jim and said, "There's only one thing to do. My leg's in bad shape, so I cannot go on. So go back to your house and put your suit on. You must come along now and work directly for me. You will finish my work and make each delivery. Tonight I need you, and I'll be fine in a day, but tonight it's up to you, Helper Jim. What do you say?" Jim couldn't believe this was happening to him. A chance to save Christmas? "Of course," said Jim. Jim put on his suit, and it was quite a sight. 2 Santas in a sleigh, flying fast through the night. With the elves and the reindeer and the sleigh bells ringing, Jim had never had so much fun. But he couldn't help thinking, no one would believe what happened that night. But then Jim thought, even if only I knew, that would be quite all right. Santa and Jim were a wonderful pair. They left gifts at each house. No other sign they were there. Santa stayed in the sleigh while Jim went inside, and at the end of each visit, off they would ride. Most of the work was already done by the time Santa's fall caused Jim to join the fun. And after all the houses but one had been done, Santa turned to Jim and said, "This is it. This is the last one." Jim smiled and winked as he climbed out of the sled and said, "I'll be right back, Santa." And Santa nodded his head. Jim made his way down to the main living room, and he felt a tad sad. The night would be over soon. But Jim was still happy and placed the gifts by the tree. He filled up the stockings. He filled up all 3. Jim's work was all done when he was about to head back, but he stopped to make sure he had emptied his sack. As he lifted his finger to get ready to go, a voice pierced the night and said, "I can see you, you know." Jim was startled and scared and knew not what to do, so he stood still with no motion, hoping the voice was not true. When out of the darkness the voice spoke and said, "I can't believe it. It's you, Santa. Your suit, it's so red." The voice was familiar, and as she stepped into the light, Jim's heart and Jim's mind couldn't make sense of the sight. You see, the woman standing before Jim was someone Jim knew, someone he loved, but things somehow fell through. She and Jim had been close long, long ago, and they were meant for each other, although neither did know. They went separate ways, and they didn't stay friends. Otherwise, the two may have crossed paths again. She had found excitement and adventures with some, and she once met a man and believed he was the one. She gave him 2 kids, but now she too was alone, with her kids and her tree, in this beautiful home. She sat down on her couch and asked Jim not to leave, although she really asked Santa. That's what she believed. She said, "I cannot describe what I'm feeling inside. Each night I feel sad, and some nights I've cried. My children make me so happy, I know I shouldn't be sad, but it's at night, when they sleep, that I start to feel bad." Jim wasn't quite sure it was the right thing to do, but he couldn't let her go on. Jim had to be true. He stopped her from talking and said, "Let me explain. While it's true, the real Santa may have an ease to your pain, but in fact, I'm not him. I'm just filling in. And in fact, you already know me. In fact, it's me, Jim. She sprung to her feet, as she was quite shocked. How did you get in? My windows and doors should be locked. Jim calmed her down and explained the whole thing, and the two had a laugh, then heard a sleigh bell ring. Jim made his way back up to the roof, but there nothing remained except the print of a reindeer hoof. Jim went back to the couch, and he tried to explain, but the truth didn't matter as Christmas morning came. It appears on this Christmas, Jim got the best gift of all, and the truth is that Santa had planned his small fall. He needed a way to get Jim to this place, and that clever old Santa did it with style and grace. He had planned it this way since last Christmas Eve. After all, the best presents come to those who believe. And if there's one thing we already know for sure about Jim, is that the joyous Christmas spirit runs deep within him. And he always deserved to find love in this way, and be happy at night, not just in the day. Jim wasn't quite sure what had happened to him till he saw a note by her tree that read, "Merry Christmas, Jim." The note was from Santa, Mrs. Claus, and the elves, and it said, "P.S. Go find happiness for yourselves." Jim reconnected with the love of his life, thanks to Santa and the elves, on that Christmas Eve night. Some people need Santa to find a mate for their soul, and not before long this family was made whole. The lesson to learn here for all girls and boys is that sometimes the best gifts are not the best toys. Sometimes the most needed gift out of all is the great gift of love, which doesn't come from a mall. Love comes from inside, from a place you can't see, and sometimes love comes from a note under your tree. And when Jim's friends got to hear of this wonderful news, they were so happy for Jim and his new family. They danced in their shoes. And so next Christmas, Jim's friends will still get visits from him, but this time with a card that reads, "Merry Christmas, love Maria, the kids, and love Jim."